the future is maybe 6 months away. If I look at us at Gamma, I think the thing that explained a lot of our early success, but then came back to bite us, was actually that we underestimated what these LLMs and agents could do. Our early product and all of its success came from the fact that we thought we had to put bubble wrap around what LLMs did and give them kid scissors to work with, because they made so many mistakes. And I think that's actually why we succeeded in this space relatively early, and why it actually took many years for competitors to get something that could be competitive with us. But now we're actually feeling the pain of all that bubble wrap that we put around the AI, because as AI starts getting smarter, it's bumping its head on the ceiling of what we gave it.
We were going to start winding the thing down at the end of the year if we couldn't figure it out. Bolt was the last one that we put online. And in the first month, we went from like 0 to 5 million of ARR. Then month 2 went to 20 million.
How many employees did you have? 12. Feels like agents and humans are highly complementary. And the more agents you have, the more humans you need to manage all the agents. Do you think that'll stay true or it'll flip at some point?
It's a good question.
Welcome to the General Podcast, the show where there's no host, no script, just the best builders talking about what they do and why they do it. In this episode, you'll hear from Eric Simons, co-founder and CEO of Bolt, and Jon Noronha, co-founder and chief product officer of Gamma. Their companies have remarkably similar origin stories, both spending years in the wilderness building ambitious technology before the market was ready for it. Bolt began as StackBlitz, where Eric and his childhood friend spent years developing an operating system that could run entirely inside a web browser. Gamma set out to reinvent presentations for remote work, painstakingly building its own editor before Gen AI entered the picture. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. Gamma's early bet on AI took the company from zero revenue to cash flow positive in a matter of months. At Bolt, the shift was even more dramatic. The company was actually preparing to wind down when one final experiment took it from 0 to 5 million ARR in its first month, and then 20 million in its second. Throughout this conversation, Eric and Jon compare notes on what happens when years of obscurity suddenly turn into explosive product market fit. They also dig into how AI is changing the way startups are shaped, meaning how the lines between product managers, designers, and engineers are blurring, and how agents can turn everyone inside a company into a builder. Along the way, they wrestle with how to build a durable strategy when the technology changes every 6 months, and whether more capable agents will ultimately mean fewer people or simply give small teams much greater leverage. That's enough from us. Eric and Jon, over to you.
So Eric, your story was compelling to me because Gamma went through a version of this story. I'll give you the bite-sized version of our origin story. Maybe you can do yours as well. We started the company in 2020. This is now feels like ancient history when code was written by hand with like very careful human magnifying glass inspection. And we spent several years in the wilderness just figuring out what our product should be. We started in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So we were all about, let's rethink PowerPoint for remote work and distributed workforces. We spent all this time handcrafting this like editor for slides. And then AI came along in our case, probably 2022, 2023, and upturned all of our plans. We jumped on that wave. And I think in our case had an advantage because we've been building infrastructure for it for many years before AI came along. And so I always said, we're not just a GPT wrapper, or at least this wrapper's got a lot of stuff going on in it. I think you guys had an even more extreme version of this story, and I'd love to hear what it was like from your perspective.
Yeah, similar thing where it was like, it sounds like you guys had a vision and like you were building the right things for when the wave came, you would be able to leverage it. And like, I think for us, we weren't necessarily betting that there was going to be some big wave that was going to hit where, and for us, like, we started the company in like 2017 when we launched it. And really the vision back then is we were building a web-based IDE for building full stack web applications. And to kind of rewrite, it's like hard to imagine this given where things are now. It's like, but it was really hard to just get a dev environment spun up back then.
Yeah.
And so the core vision is my co-founder and I, he and I actually grew up down the street from each other in a suburb of Chicago. And like, we learned how to program websites when we were like 13 and we've been building stuff together ever since. So we came out to Silicon Valley back in like 2011, 2012 and just started doing startups.
So you guys knew each other forever, actually.
Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
He's one of my best friends from childhood. And so he and I have been working on stuff for like 20 years together.
Yeah.
And so, in the first 5 years we were in the Valley, we tried a whole bunch of different ideas. Almost all of them did not work. But, we did dozens of these things. But what we ended up, through that process, we got really good at building, state of the art web applications, like the limits of what you can do in browsers. And we'd also had the good fortune of bumping into Dylan Field and Evan Wallace when they were first building Figma. So kind of the short of it is like, their pitch for Figma, the earliest pitch was, it was just a 3D ball dropping into water, this WebGL based.
I've seen that WebGL demo.
Yes.
It's incredible. Yeah.
It's incredible. And so they didn't even have a design tool made. It was just their pitch was browsers are way more powerful than they were before. And we think we can bring design to the browser in the same way that Google brought Gmail and Docs and whatever. And this would be huge if we can do that. And obviously we've seen how that bet played out for them.
By the way, it's funny you mentioned Figma as the inspiration because we took so much inspiration from their story too. I think what inspired us was they too spent several years building a core technology before they had totally nailed the application. And it takes an insane amount of self-belief, often before others believe in you, to power through that feeling of wilderness before you get that hook and it turns into a product.
And it's such a treacherous road, right? Because when you're doing a deep technology play like that, like what you guys did and what we did, yeah, exactly. I mean, the first years you have to be, laser focused, and you have to have a clear vision of like, what are we doing here? And, what exactly is this technology going to allow people to do? Because a lot of people will delude themselves into thinking, oh, we're doing some deep technology thing, it'll be so valuable. And this is the nature of deep technology bets, literally, is that the risk actually tends to be front loaded. If you're making the right bet, the market risk tends to be a lot lower of it, right? We took a similar bet where we basically wrote this WebAssembly based operating system that could boot in a browser in like 200 milliseconds, runs all of Node.js, blah, blah, blah. And you could write full stack web apps. And so we ended up launching that technology in 2021. Developers loved it. We had millions of developers using it. And it was, in the development world, it shook the ground of like, whoa, this is crazy. But interestingly, it was, developers just couldn't, they weren't willing to pay for the thing, right? And we're like, what? Like, come on, this is nuts, right? And, and at the time, there's all these cloud IDEs. It was like this whole hype cycle thing going on then. And there's a lot of companies, including some peers that, are in the vibe coding space now. And there's a lot of ones that didn't make it and died. But it was a kind of a mirage of a market where the pitch sounded right, but developers just love their key bindings of being local and whatever.
Was the early market there building for engineers, basically?
For sure, yeah, exactly. Because it's like, I mean, we solved the dev environment problem and et cetera, but you still had to like know how to code.
Yeah. Because what's funny for us is the place we saw early adoption of tools like StackBlitz and others was actually our design team, which wanted to make these code prototypes, but just could not handle keeping up with all the Docker stuff.
Exactly. And we had a lot of pull from like, front-end teams and like kind of more product-y teams for StackBlitz for rapid prototyping, that sort of thing. But it wasn't enough to, I think we got to like 500K of ARR after, 3, 4, or 5 years of us kind of grinding our enterprise motion. And so in 2024, we still had, like more than half the money we'd ever raise in the bank, but we've been around for like 7 years or something at that point. And we're like, if we're going to continue to run this business, we have to have a trajectory that makes sense as a venture-backed business. And so by the end of the year, we were going to start winding the thing down at the end of the year if we couldn't figure it out. And we tried out 3 or 4 different ideas of different types of products we could build. Bolt was the last one that we put online in October of 24. The board meeting we were going to officially kind of start spinning things down was the next month. And in the first month, we went from like 0 to 5 million of ARR or something. And
my God.
And we were kind of one of the first companies that saw that. Now this is like a common thing, but no one had ever seen anything like this before. And then month 2 went to 20 million and it was just nuts. And so, but it was.
How many employees did you have at that moment? You went from 0 to 5 to 20.
12. And the number of, we had like 100,000 customers come in the first month or something like that. And we had no support team. It was like, so my chief of staff and I, and then those were the only like non-technical. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade, but like, people that are going to respond to the support inbox, is me and my chief of staff and then 10 engineers working on the thing. And so we were just spending, 4 or 5 hours a day, my chief of staff and I just responding to emails, and we were like, what are we going to do? So it was kind of, we caught this tsunami wave to ride on. But it was because of, kind of circling back to your main question was, we were building out this technology. Like Bolt is built on, it was called web containers, that in-browser technology that just spins up a dev environment, and that's critical because when you come to Bolt and you prompt whatever idea you want to build, there needs to be some environment that's actually executing that code and displaying the preview and updating when you're making changes. And that technology is what allowed us to, 1, build the product in 90 days, because that's like really one of the harder parts. And then 2, be able to scale instantly because of the nature of the technology. And so it's just one of these, similar to you guys, where it's like, you kind of had this specific conviction on, hey, this is like, there's something in your gut. It's like, this is going to be important.
It's so amazing hearing the similarities of your story to ours, except that in your story, everything is just cranked up about 2x, I would say. So for us, it was maybe like 3 years in the wilderness trying to find our home. We'd gotten to the point of maybe having a year of runway left. when we did this big launch around AI. We had $0 in revenue at the time. We were also 12 people. That's like a striking similarity to me. And I've often thought, could we have done it in less time with fewer people? And I keep coming back to no. Actually, we needed every single one of those people and every single day or month we had. Yes, we made some wrong turns along the way, of course, in the idea maze. But actually, like knowing what we knew then, we just barely made it in time to the place that we needed to go. And even if we'd been a few more months behind, we probably wouldn't have made it. It's crazy to think of. And we also had this absolutely insane inflection the moment we found that true red hot product market fit of going from in March, like less than a year of runway.
What year was this?
2023.
2023.
In our case,
okay.
so maybe a little bit earlier than you guys.
Yeah.
So we launched basically AI generated presentations, and we just saw this total lift off in users, not revenue yet because we still weren't monetizing, but we launched at the end of March. In April, I am spending my entire weekends doing support tickets on Intercob, the exact same thing. By May, maybe like a third of our team is doing support tickets all weekend. We're all just in this hell because there's just more and more.
Yep.
We're not even monetizing yet. We start monetizing. And by like June, July, we're already cash flow positive. We're already making all this money. Things had just reversed so quickly. And the whiplash of it was crazy. Obviously, this was a wonderful feeling. This thing you've worked on for so many years, like, oh my gosh, finally vindication. Finally, people are seeing the value. But truly, I felt like a sailboat on the water, getting no wind for so long, and then just getting absolutely blasted by it and trying to keep up with like, let's not tip over, let's not drown.
What was that like for, you and your team? Like going from, you're on a completely calm ocean. It's like no land in sight. And you're like, oh my God, do we have enough supplies to even find land and survive? Yeah. To then just like hurricane, throwing you in a direction. You're like, wow, okay. What was that like? And how big was your team at that time when that kind of kicked in?
Our team was 12 through all of this. And
okay. Wow. Very similar size and stuff.
Very similar. I heard this metaphor that felt so true to me about product market fit, that before you have product market fit, you are pushing a rock up a hill. Yeah. And every day is a grind with sort of no end in sight. And the moment you hit product market fit, you are chasing a rock down the hill. And the thing I reflect on about that metaphor is neither one's particularly fun. You don't get to just sit at the top of the hill with your rock and enjoy the view. We got like a day of that. And then all of a sudden we were chasing again, just trying to keep up with it. And it was really fun in many ways, if you like running, I guess. But we just had to run for a year straight, maybe 2 years straight of just keeping up with everything there before we could even maybe think clearly about what was going on in our life. And I, again, feel like for you guys, it was maybe even crazier than us.
Yeah. Well, I empathize with what you're saying there. Like, that's how I felt like, because, there isn't this, you don't get to relish in the, oh, wow, we cracked the thing and whatever. It's just, you're thrown into a, I would actually say even more intense version of, to me at least, like when you're alone and building or whatever, there's some like, you're in solitude of just,
it's kind of meditative, kind of fun. I look back at it as actually the most fun era of company building, especially before it got existentially scary, when it was just purely exploration. You're just sailing on calm waters, and there's no land in sight, but when you got some money in the bank, it's okay. Because you're like, oh, we'll probably find it. And even if we don't, we're early, like whatever.
Exactly.
It's an adventure.
Totally. And it's a much more of a you versus you thing. Right. And I think that's probably true even in the, when you're chasing product market fit. And perhaps our experience is a little different because of the mass. This became one of the most competitive markets in the world for vibe coding. It was a wild thing. The past year and a half or so, I mean, since we launched Bolt, was just an unbelievable experience to navigate that like really stretched me to my limits of. And I've been doing startups for 15 years. I just never see anything like this. It's just, and people I would go to kind of get playbooks of like, how do you handle this? The playbooks would all assume that like, it'll take you 5 years to get 20 million of ARR. So this is how it's like, that's not that we have to do that in like 2 months or something.
Yeah. We got 3 months to do the thing you said took 5 years. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's just, there's new playbooks that you have to go and kind of generate, if you want to try and meet the demand. In a lot of cases, it's just kind of impossible to do in the time frame. So you have to like, I feel like a lot of it, regardless of stage, I think a lot of the way that I look as a founder, right, of doing startups is just knowing what balls to drop. Even it's just like ones that are ugly to drop. You're like, we have to be so brutal in the stack ranking of this. Well, I said to our team, because during this time, it was obviously, not like similar for what you guys are going through. The analogy I gave to our team was like, we are in a town that's just like on fire, right? And we've got everyone in the town is calling us about their house, right? And so in that situation, what do you do? And the only logical answer is you have to be really strategic about, if you have one fire engine that can go and put stuff out, you have to go after the most critical infrastructure first. You have to be very methodical. And that means that there's going to be a lot of destruction that will happen wittingly because you have to make those decisions, but you have to be in that mindset.
Just on that, do you think it was an advantage that you already had this team that had been working together for several years before you hit this moment of liftoff? Versus the typical company that hits PMF is like, maybe they've only been around for 90 days. They just put the team together and all of a sudden they're doing this hyperscaling.
For sure. Yeah. I'd be curious to hear your answer too. But I mean, at least for us, there's a huge trust thing where, everyone that's been there, I mean, one, they know everything inside and out. And two, there's, the level of autonomy that people have to operate with is massive. And so, having that deep level of trust, and most people at our company had been there for 5 or 6 years at that point. So it was like that level of underlying trust and friendship allowed the tension that was being put on our team to not actually break. Right. I'm curious if on your end too, though.
I had the same word in mind of trust. That was the big takeaway for me. For us at Gamma, we've been building for maybe 2 to 3 years at that point. But actually most of our early team had all worked together at a prior company, Optimizely, including my co-founders and I. So I'd worked with some of these people for, at that point, maybe like 7 years, now closer to like 12 years probably. And so there's a deep well of trust there, and trust that goes both ways. Trust that like, wow, we have so many unknowns. Leadership does not have it all figured out, but we will figure it out. Also trust downward. I know that I can trust a person to just go figure something out and that they will just do it. I don't need to second guess or investigate. That trust, I think, was so essential for us to make the sharp turns that were needed then. And it turns out the sharp turns never stop being needed. They only seem to be getting sharper and more urgent.
Yep.
I keep using this metaphor of like the roller coaster or the fighter jet, where in this era of crazy fast AI development and the competition around it, the victor is going to be whoever can make the fastest, sharpest turns without barfing. I'd love to learn from you on this whole question of competition, because Gamma's story is actually a little bit unusual here, which is that we hit this sort of red hot product market fit. And then very oddly, for a period of about 2 years, we had almost no competition. I don't know why this was. It was probably just pure luck, but I think a lot of companies stayed away from this world of presentation generation. The big labs released very basic versions, but they didn't really work. Even PowerPoint and Google Slides, our big competitors, just seemed to really struggle with integrating AI into their products, much more so than I expected. When we had this big launch in March 2023, I was like, guys, by May or June, PowerPoint's going to have this too.
Yeah.
So we got to race and race. And it just kept on not coming. That's changed now for us in our space. I think what's happened in particular in the last 6 months is that we have seen competition really heat up in our world. And part of it is this way in which vibe coding eats the world. I saw you guys even have Bolt slides. Everybody's converging on everything, right? Yeah. Everybody's building all the same things. It turns out with vibe coding, you can build every artifact, everything. And so everyone becomes a competitor of everyone else. The thing I'm actually realizing now is that even though the 2 years felt hard of all the things we had to do, in many ways, it didn't serve us so well to not have a tight competitor during that time, because it let us not put on the gas in certain areas. It didn't force us to question key assumptions about our product. And so we could be sort of lazy in various areas because we didn't have that competitor breathing down our neck. You guys, I believe, have been the exact opposite, where you were surrounded by wall-to-wall competition from the very start. Did pressure make diamonds? What was that like?
I'm hearing you talking like, God, the grass is greener. You're like, no, the grass is not greener. You had to deal with that
because
first.
The competition comes eventually, right?
Yeah, for sure, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how like my frame on the past year and a half is like, it's difficult figuring out, like, this is where having your own bottoms up analysis, that you're not just kind of stealing someone else's homework about your strategy. Like, you're really, kind of the thinking from first principles stuff about what you believe and what you believe it'll take to win. I mean, when you have this level of competition, that's the only way that you're going to win. You have to really be thinking clearly and in ways that are would be so uncomfortable to do without that pressure on you.
Yeah.
And I think even with the pressure, I think a lot of I think many people would be tempted to come up with things that sound good, right? Versus things that are having to keep peeling back ugly layers and just being like, God, no. Okay, wait a second, that's interesting. So I think for startups in general, I mean, it's about focus, and then especially what's like going after things that are very as narrow as you can get, that are outside of the lens. Like, to your point, it's just like everyone's competing with everyone at this point, right? So if you're going to go deep on stuff, what is going to be that thing that you really go and own, that only in retrospect it's going to be like obvious that was the correct thing to do, but to even understand that, you have to like be going into your own data, talking to your own users, going and doing R&D, like how can we make this type of experience better than everything else, and throw all of your weight into that. We're thinking 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of, okay, we go and do this, but how, like for the foundation labs, how likely is it that they're gonna beeline to this because it's just on the warpath. For the other peers and startups that we're looking at, who's going and doing things similar to this, et cetera, are they going to be focused on this specific slice of customers and use cases? And when the answer is kind of no to those things, but yet it's actually something that looks crazy promising, that's when we lean in and get interested, right? And so it'll be interesting to see over the next few years. What I would expect to see is there's going to be companies that really specialize and do extremely well, and there's going to be companies that didn't focus and then and don't do as well over the next period. Because the last year and a half was really, it strikes me much more as a land grab phase of this thing versus this is actually what's going to determine the over the next 5 years, who's even going to be around, right?
That's been the perplexing thing about watching this market as, the vibe coding market, I mean, as partly a participant, but mainly an observer, because we're sort of adjacent to vibe coding. We're not really in it. And I think land grab is the right term. And my perception watching it is that the companies that are doing well are just doing everything in a way that, to me as an outsider, feels totally unfocused and somewhat chaotic, and yet it's working for them. It's even true to a degree in our space, and it's even true to a degree with the labs as well. I think what I'm hearing you say is, yes, that's true for the current phase, but it may not stick. And the truth is, nobody knows what's going to happen in the next couple of years.
So the way I view it is that, I think if you look in the, by the way, I'm very bullish on AI, but I think the inference is going to continue to rocket, whether the margins go to the labs or others, whatever. But the hyperscalers and the hardware, it's all demand is there and only growing, especially as the price comes down per token. Totally. Right. What I will say is, the .com boom is very similar in the sense where the ideas being pitched back then and executed on were valid over the following decade. Darn near most of the things.
Yeah, webvan made a lot of sense in retrospect.
It did, and so there's a question of timing. But then you also look at the OpenAI and Anthropics of those times where Yahoo might be a good example of getting their hands into everything, and it worked during that period, right? And then the problem though is you can't be good at everything, and maybe this changes because you can have 10,000 fables building out but it's like. Okay, in which case maybe this time is different. But as we just kind of sit here looking at this, and again, even looking at, to your point around the frontier labs, the stuff they do have in slides. I mean, if that's true, Fable's been around for 9 months. I mean, if they wanted to crush, if they want to make the best slides thing, totally. It'll probably be here, right? Or at least we'll be here shortly. So my view of this is I think that there's kind of there's currently a bundling that's happening here. But when you kind of look under the hood of these things, especially much of the high-flying ARR numbers being shared by a lot of the companies that are doing this sort of bundling, the retention of these things getting bundled tends to be low because the quality of it and the durability of that is just not there. And that's kind of what happened, with like Yahoo as an example, right? Again, not to say that that's for sure the way it's going to go, but that is my view. Is like I think that I look at that as the historical prior of just an example of this sort of phase we're in. And maybe 5 years from now, someone's going to watch this podcast and be like, wow, that was actually like a prescient observation. Maybe not. They're like, wow, he was dead wrong, but to me, it's just everything that I see. I don't see any data points. I have a financial incentive to be saying the otherwise, right? It's like, if it's actually as easy as just bundling, I mean, that game on, right? So that's my view on it.
But it's interesting. The undertone of all of this of like make a strategy is kind of predict the future. And we are in this market where it feels like predicting the future has gotten trickier than ever. Also, the future is maybe 6 months away. And yet it feels like so much will happen between now and then in all of these fields. And so that's something that I really struggle with in trying to make long range strategy. I think every time I say long range strategy, my team laughs at me now because they mean, the thing you'll make for 3 months and then change 6 weeks from now. But that goes back to the fighter jet thing. You don't want your fighter jet to just stay on one track for the entire fight. You're not going to have a very good fight if you do all of that. And so we're adapting. If I look at us at Gamma, I think the thing that explained a lot of our early success, but then came back to bite us, was actually that we underestimated what these LLMs and agents could do. Our early product and all of its success came from the fact that we thought we had to put bubble wrap around what LLMs did and give them kid scissors to work with because they made so many mistakes. And so we had all of these sort of deterministic add-ons and helpful heuristics we put around what that LLM is doing. And I think that's actually why we succeeded in this space relatively early, 2023, when AI still kind of sucked, and why it actually took many years for competitors to get something that could be competitive with us. But now we're actually feeling the pain of all that bubble wrap that we put around the AI, because as AI starts getting smarter, it's bumping its head on the ceiling of what we gave it. And I heard this phrase a while ago that AI is an anti-incumbent technology, because in many ways, it's actually easier for someone starting from nothing with Fable access to just make a sick new product with no assumptions versus carrying around all the baggage of the things that we've made. And of course, you like us have now been in the arena for a while, building up, I won't call it cruft, we'll call it infrastructure, but the line can be a little bit blurry as you build for a while. So a lot of how we're retooling ourselves internally is aggressively questioning all of our assumptions. And it goes back to the thing you said around competition. Competition forces you to look at these assumptions you made that sounded good at the time, even when your users said, oh, I'm not totally sure about this. We are now mercilessly questioning all the pillars of our products that we built along the way. All of those bubble wrap things, peeling them away, but still trying to keep the core and the durability of what actually makes our products special. And I'm having a lot of fun in that process. I think it's a unique privilege of the founder that you get to tear down your own sandcastle in a way that maybe sometimes as an employee feels scary or feels like you can't question things. But I'm also trying to encourage everyone to question things. And I'm trying to build on that same feeling of trust that we had early on in the company, which said, we can trust each other to question everything. We can kick away parts of the foundation and know that the castle will still stay standing, the parts that we like. I'm curious if you've had to do this as well, of like peel away your early assumptions and rethink your whole roadmap and where it's going.
Yeah, totally. I mean, for sure. Like, I think, I think for you all, it's like, it's nice that you have a very specific surface area you're going after, right? So it's like, and some of these, it's actually, there's a level of like built-in focus. Whereas with us too, it's, when we launched Bolt, we had no idea what people were going to, we thought developers were going to use this to build out front-end prototypes or something, right? And it turned out we had people building businesses on this thing. So I think I think for us as well, we certainly we're constantly kind of looking at what are our assumptions across all of this stuff. And we're very agnostic really about where we should be placing bets next, right? And I think that's, and it kind of come back to like what you'd said about the fighter jet thing. I mean, that is so what we believe. And this kind of comes down to also the headcount thing, where you all continue to have a very small team, despite the size of your business, and same with us. But you can only do that. You can only make those sort of fast turns, I think, when you really have a smaller headcount size of the organization.
Absolutely.
Because the more people you have, it's the change management. My wife is a people operations person. So she's actually our head of people. And she's done this for a couple of companies, like any scale. She took them from like 3 to a couple hundred people. But it's like, the more people you add, change management. It's like
steering a bigger ship is a lot harder than steering a small one.
Oh my God. Yeah. Cause it's like, because everyone's got to, understand and be on board with especially if they're big changes. I mean, oftentimes if you have a couple hundred people, I mean, it's like, that is still
how many folks are you guys now?
I think we're like 70 people now, something like that. So we're like still a meaningful size, but we've been able to basically kind of, cap headcount and lean into adopting agents for stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that's critical for, especially if you're going to go and be looking at what are the assumptions, or even some of the intentional bets we made that we need to look at again. And if you're going to swap those out, I mean, if you have hundreds of people that you're gonna have to get on board with it, there's gonna be hundreds of opinions.
Yep.
Right. And like, it's hard to,
and by the way, you want you want everyone to have an opinion. That's the thing. Another way to steer is to have a bunch of employees that don't care where they're going, just follow orders, but that's not right either.
Yep, exactly. And so I think to me, it's like, just having a tighter core of people that are as close to the fire hose as possible, right, allows you to be extremely nimble and dynamic. How many people are currently at your company, headcount size?
I'll give you some of the backstory. So we are now about 100 people, but at the end of last year, we announced we'd hit 100 million ARR with 50 people. And that 2 million ARR per employee number, we certainly played it up. It's like a cool number. I'm proud of it. But the reality of living inside that was it was so hard. Yeah. Actually, like it turns out there's such a thing as too lean. We were feeling the pain left and right. But I'll let you ask your question.
Yeah. So where are you now? If you're at 100 or 50 people at 100 million ARR, how much has the company grown in headcounts?
Yeah.
By the way, that's incredible. Kudos to you guys.
Thank you. Yeah. So we've actually doubled the company employee-wise since basically January. We've gone from around 50 to over 100 now, probably trending towards around 150 by the end of this year.
Okay.
And we had a discussion at the end of last year of like, how much do we grow? Because on the one hand, people are getting more efficient, agents are coming along, we've really valued our leanness, most of all for this point we talked about, of that ability to maneuver and pivot. And yet we also found we were just leaving things on the floor, not to mention competing with giants. The companies we are up against are not nearly as lean as we are. They can throw a lot of resources at things. They're building a lot of durable infrastructure that we have to go up against. And also you want to maintain your culture. Even if the answer is to grow, it's like how quickly. And so we kind of waffled between, do we double? Do we quadruple? Ugh, ended up at triple. And that's sort of the path that we've been on. And it's felt just about right. It's felt both too fast and too slow, which means it's probably the right in-betweener. And I think what we're finding is that now at 100 people, we still have that nimbleness, maybe not as much as we had when we were 12 people. But the reality is it's not our people that are holding us back. It's supporting millions and millions of customers. We also crossed 100 million users who signed up for our product.
Wow.
And so I know it's just an unbelievable number. And you just think about, what does it take to support that many people who all come from different countries, use your product in different ways, have different needs? It's easy to say, oh, we're lean and tiny and agents do everything. But then the moment something breaks for a customer and you're in the middle of the incident, you kind of wish you had more engineers who could help with that. You kind of wish you had salespeople who could actually answer the phone when all these customers are expressing interest in your product. And so even though I think we are still very lean in global terms, we've actually tried to index a bit back towards like, let's actually hire enough people to go pursue our vision. But it's not been easy, because I think in the midst of us going through hyper growth, the competitive landscape is changing. What the product is changing, and everyone's individual job function is changing drastically. And I am our head of product, so I see this most of all in product engineering design and the way that triad operates. And I see it changing pretty intensely. I think the biggest thing that's changing is that the linear sequencing of work, of like PM defines the problem, designer goes off and researches and explores divergent ideas and then comes back with a proposal, and then the engineer implements, has just totally blown up. All those steps are actually still needed on some level, but the order of them changes. They're sort of overlapping or even sometimes reversed. Like an engineer builds a cool prototype, design shapes into something cool. PM now figures out, how do we actually anchor this towards the problems that we're facing? I think we're still learning that it's so cheap to actually make more ideas that you can try 2 or 3 swings at the same idea instead of just one. For us, also, the ratios are changing. I'm curious if this is true for you. We do have traditional PM, designers, engineers, but we're finding that fewer engineers can achieve the same impact. And yet in many cases, the product manager's job of like, go coordinate with like real customers, real internal sales functions, have not sped up to the same degree. And so you almost need more of those things. You don't want the coordination tax. So it is a whole soup of change that we're swimming through right now.
Yeah, I'm curious to kind of dig in more on how you are all doing this, because like on our end, the way that I've kind of viewed this, it's very similar, but like the role of like PM, designer, developer, there's this like convergence happening, right? Where kind of it's unclear what the right like kind of lanes and split is that, but like for our engineers, like we've always been a very engineering heavy company, because we were built prior to this, we were selling to developers, and there's a lot of value in just being a group of developers, building developer tools for developers. There's kind of this seamless pathway to enacting change quickly. Now we're selling to many more people than developers. That's actually I don't know, maybe 20% of our audience or something that's developers. So we've had to staff up more in our product side and design side. And so, but for the engineers on the team, we've explicitly said it. You're now actually a PM now too, right? You have to actually sharpen your skills in this new area, because it's hard for me to imagine just being a developer, if you fast forward 5 years, that they're not going to be thinking about the same things that a PM does, right? And even doing similar parts of the job of a PM. And same thing for designers as well, both from a development and PM perspective, and vice versa, blah, blah, blah. So we're trying to actually really push more convergence of just people stepping out of their comfort zone, going and ramping up on new skills, because fundamentally it seems to me that it's your point around, it's never been cheaper to like go and try out ideas, right? It's more really a question of what should we build versus like, okay, how long will it take to scope this out and blah, blah, blah. That was really the only reason we had the process you were describing before of, okay, like the design team's got to go off and make a couple variants, propose something, product's got to make sure it aligns with the business, and then developers go and make the thing. That's the only sensible way to organize EPD work in a world where it costs a lot of time and money to actually write the software, right? And so, but if you kind of remove those constraints, then it's really just more, how do you have more people that are thinking and thinking the same ways across those functions? So we're really just trying to push the limits, and we're kind of still in the exploratory phase of this, of how can we better empower developers to be thinking more like PMs or designers, designers more like devs and PMs vice versa to those.
It feels like the roles used to be skill set based. A designer is someone who knows how to use Figma, an engineer is someone who knows how to write code, and a PM is someone who you trust enough to put in front of customers and knows how to like write some SQL to get the data they need.
Yeah.
Those things are all like merging into each other as all of those skills become democratized. And now it feels like it's less about skill sets and more about inclinations. The person who likes to go really horizontal and explore, the person who really fine tunes things like performance because that's, what gets them going. The person who wants to talk to the customer because that's the part they actually enjoy. And so I think we are going to see these three roles just totally blend, but not into one undifferentiated blob, but into just a new different set of species. And it will be, the slop cannons versus the craftsman versus whatever it is. I don't know exactly what the lines are, but I'm already seeing it on our team. And it's really energizing to me just to see so many people on my team, especially the PMs and the designers, be so empowered to do things they couldn't do before, building entire workflows and just unlocking like new value for our customers that used to be stuck in the hands of engineers that weren't always sure how to even use that power.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the cool thing is like, I think there's so many of these folks like on our development team, they're brilliant, right? And they've actually just never had the opportunity to go and think like, and to me, it's almost like thinking like an entrepreneur, right? Like that's a lot of what product is about, right? Is you're really thinking about like an entrepreneur, what around how do we help serve the end customers and products like the PMs, I would say like the role when we first launched Bold and we saw them using it, it just made so much sense to me because often PMs, at least in the previous era before this stuff, their job was to identify, to talk to customers, identify opportunities where you could go and improve the experience for the customer. And then to go and like in some companies beg the designers, like this is important, please do. And then once the design people come back, beg the developers, please prior to do this, right? And so they're the entrepreneurs within the organization really responsible for enacting change for the betterment of the customers and therefore the business. But the best tool they had was like Jira, basically, to enact that change. And so obviously this just changes that where PMs can actually make the prototypes for this stuff, right? And then vice versa on the other side, it's like these other functions like design and development. It turns out these people are also brilliant and are like, oh wow, there's a whole other dimension to this I never really understood or got exposed to. And now I can. And with my skill set, I can see things that the PM might have normally missed because they're not working. They don't understand the intricacies of our backend infrastructure and how to like decrease the latency and blah blah blah. But I'm seeing a correlation between when this thing responds in this amount of time versus that converts better. So I'm going to go, so anyway, so it's basically, it's turning kind of everyone into an entrepreneur within the organization. And that's like, how do you move fast? How do you win? I mean, if you're thinking like an entrepreneur, like that's
the more of that energy you have inside your company, the more art you'll be.
Yep, exactly. So that's like, for us, that's kind of the drum that we've been beating to like, kind of, and it's not even just the EPD function, like our CX team, they're talking to customers all day long. They are seeing tons of insights. And they were knocking on the door of product going, hey, there's all these things, et cetera. And so we ended up flipping the process. We were like, okay, anyone at the company, we're gonna have an open forum where you can write a PRD and attach a Bolt prototype and, go into our internal data analytics tool and get how many customers, are impacted this or blah, blah, blah. And every week we're gonna sit down and review all of them. And if it's good to go, we're handing it directly to Engine, they're gonna ship it. If there's stuff you need to work on, we'll give the feedback live, right? And we're going to be very brutal and fast about how we go and do this. Since we implemented that, I think it was like a couple of months ago. I mean, the amount of stuff that like our sales and CX teams, et cetera, things that they've generated that have shipped, it's like at least a quarter of these things have just immediately.
That's amazing. It's the future of how small companies will be built. But this is something that's been on my mind too. It goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about around speed and agility. I think what you're describing can work in a 70-person company. Maybe it can work in a 700-person company. I'm not really sure. I can't imagine how 7,000 or 70,000 companies are doing this. I think it is so hard to create this kind of culture and even sustain this kind of culture. To give you an example that we're feeling internally, we have tried to push even one click further than what you just described, but I won't claim that we've nailed it yet, which is we have Slack channels that we've had since the very beginning of the company that are things like bugs, little annoying things, wish lists, where anybody can post about something that bothers them. Another one is like customer feedback. We started plugging coding agent automations with those channels where every single one of those gets an automated PR open that tries to diagnose what went wrong and propose a fix. And talk about empowerment. You don't even have to make a prototype and justify it with a PRD. You've now got a straight line into the code base. But of course, now someone needs to actually review all these things. And there's actually multiple someones. There's a product manager who has to think about, is this actually where we want the product to go? There's an engineer that has to wonder, is this really right for the code base? And of course, if a salesperson just posted a random piece of feedback from a customer, they're not owning each of those pieces. They don't even necessarily want to be. We want the feedback channel open. And so now we need to figure out what's that next babysitting process to get these things in. But I think if we play forward what you're saying, you actually need to get into that mindset where you are removing as many layers in between that feedback you're getting from the customer and change in the product. But it's going to create this whole new set of roles of oversight of these pipelines of changes that are coming through. And I think it's possible to experiment with that kind of company culture when you're still small.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking back to when I worked at Microsoft, which was 100,000 people at the time. I was a product manager. And really all I did all day was take things to reviews where they would get shit on because they didn't pass someone's test of, oh, this will violate this one thing. In fact, that was the whole point of a PM. It was to attempt to shepherd change through a vitocracy. And I think these companies are changing a lot since I worked there. It's been a while for me. I think there's some really incredible CEOs that are sort of driving that transformation. But man, how do you run that at a scale of 100,000 people? I just can't picture it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to imagine the current companies of that size figuring it out. But then I think about companies like yours, companies like ours, where, to your point, the small headcount thing. It sounds like it's been a great headline grabber, right? And there's truth. There's much truth there. Totally. But on the flip side, also as the customer base and user base grows, you have to add more folks to the team. And I think that Gamma is going to get to the point where you have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people. And I suspect, and Bolt too or whatever. And I suspect that I think we're going to figure it out, right? It's hard for me to imagine scaling the company up from where we're sitting now without having these things, like having this stuff sorted, right? Because to me, it's, and especially with the models just continue to get better and agents more capable. It strikes, at least, and that's kind of how I'm viewing it as we scale the company.
So you mentioned that, you have no doubt we'll be in the thousands of people. I thought that about us too, but I'm a bit surprised to hear it from a coding agent company. And I think it's because for a long time, the dialogue around coding agents was they're going to replace engineers. We don't need so many engineers. But I think implied in what you're saying is that that's actually not what we've seen so much over the last year or two. And certainly what we found internally is that it feels like agents and humans are highly complementary. And the more agents you have, the more humans you need to manage all the agents. Do you think that'll stay true or it'll flip at some point?
It's a good question. I mean, at least just for what line of sight that we can see, because a lot just depends on how capable these models get, right? But like, certainly, even in a world of like Fable class models, these are not models that you could be like, that model is going to be the head of product, right? Or even the PM on this specific feature. Like, they are highly augmentative, to those functions. But it strikes me that as the business succeeds, to your point, the scale of customers you're working with, you simply are going to have more people. And yes, they're going to be way more leverage than they could have ever been before because of agents. But nonetheless, like you are going to need more people to manage all these leveraged agents and whatever have you. And it's not clear to me exactly when there's a tipping point where again, there's no agent at the company today where we're like, blindly, we're just trusting you to be the head of, we have an email support agent, but it's like an IC that and then kicks out and actually tags into human when it can't help the person, right? And the head of CX or the head of this, it's like, we're not close today. That said, obviously the rate of improvement is massive here with the models, but it's hard for me to imagine it getting there, in the sort of timeframes we're talking about. But yeah.
Totally. Well, I think what you said before is totally right. Who knows what's going to happen, but we will each figure it out. It's been awesome chatting with you, Eric. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise, it's been a blast.